Okay, so hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Fall Global. This is where we connect with global first entrepreneurs, remote work experts, and tech leaders from around the world to share their experiences. Our guest today is Jonathan Smith, Chief of Staff at Tembo. Jonathan, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Jonathan, it's great to have you on the Fall Global podcast. Before we dive into the details, maybe let's start with a quick intro. Could you share maybe some details about your journey that led you to your current role as a chief of staff at Tembo?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll warn you, I see one of my cats. Here he comes. He really wants to be on
That's
the
okay.
desk. He heard I was doing a podcast
He will be a
and thought he
famous
would. Yeah, I'm
person,
gonna,
yeah.
I'm gonna remove this cat. Yeah, so I'm the chief of staff at a company called Tembo.
Mhm.
Tembo is we're building a managed Postgres. Postgres for everything is sort of
Okay.
the mantra we're trying to make true for developers around the world. My journey to chief of staff is I don't know that there is a standard journey to chief of staff, but I guess that means I can say mine is non-standard. I started my career as in operations actually for a consulting firm, qualitative market research, so consumer interviews, that sort of thing. And then from there, went to work for a large nonprofit for a few years, caught the bug, decided to start my own company, ran a tech startup through a couple of accelerators, one of which was Techstars in Chicago. That was in 2018. The accelerator was massively successful for us in that it accelerated us directly into a wall. We ran out of money, shut the company down. And from there, I knew I wanted to stay in tech, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I'd tried the founder thing, it hadn't worked out, made a lot of great connections. One of those connections I made along the way was with a man named Rye Walker. Rye Walker is based in Cincinnati, Ohio, like I am. And he, at the time, was the CEO of a company called Astronomer. It's the Apache Airflow company, more or less. And I caught up with him late last year. He had made his way out of Astronomer, had his own sort of exit from the company, even though the company's still going strong, and was ready to do something new. And he posted on LinkedIn and said, hey, I'm starting something new. It's going to be working in Postgres. I need these sorts of engineers. And I messaged him and said, I am not an engineer. How would you like someone to do everything else? That got me the job somehow. And then after that, for the longest time, we're less than a year old at this point. But when we would write down our areas of responsibility, okay, so he's got platform, he's got private data plane, he's got, our Tembo stacks, whatever the thing was. Next to my name, it just said everything else smiley face. Because it was that's the kind of utility role I like to play, especially in an early stage startup. So I'm the very rare day one chief of staff. I think you only get one of those if you're a second time founder, but that's how I
Yeah,
ended up here.
yeah. But if we just go more specifically, chief of staff at tech startup, can you tell me more about this
Yeah.
role? What exactly are you doing there?
Yeah, I mean, actually, it's one of my favorite things to talk about. I've been meeting with lots of chiefs of staff recently, getting connected in the chief of staff communities. There are several, and helping people who want to transition into that role. I'm fond of saying chief of staff is not a job description, right? It is every time I go out and say, hey, I'm looking for chiefs of staff for other portfolio companies, and in the Venrock was led our Series A, or sorry, our seed round rather. And I'm looking for chiefs of staff for their companies, and they're like, okay, great, can you send me a job description? No, I can't, and I won't. There is no job description for chief of staff. It's if somebody shows you one, they're lying, because it's not a job description. Chief of staff is a way of thinking. It's a philosophy, and the way I help people understand that is view the chief of staff, that salary, that equity, view that not as an investment in operations, which I think is sort of like the fail state for the chief of staff. View the chief of staff salary as an investment in your executive team. These are smart folks who shouldn't be running payroll, right? They shouldn't be, uh, making sure the financial model is updated. They shouldn't be, in most cases, creating the actual fundraising deck unless they super want to, right? So I meet with our CEO, Rye, nearly every day, and the conversation is always the same. What do you need to get done, and how can I help you do it? Sometimes some days I'm an executive assistant, and that's just what my job is. But it's because Rye needs that day. The next day, I might be running a team meeting because Rye needs me to do that so he can really pay attention. We have a quarterly offsite coming up, and to the extent it needs to be planned, I am planning it or making sure it gets planned. So it's more of a way of thinking than it is a particular job. And as I've just done recently, and we'll have to keep doing, the term I use is, I didn't invent this, but I read it somewhere, like giving away all your Legos. I accumulate lots of fun toys and things to do, and then I have to give them all away and move on to a completely new set of things. So I stood up early days of a startup. You're going to expect to be a lot of it to be operational, finance, legal, payroll, all those sorts of things, the initial policies and procedures for the company. But pretty quickly, my role has become almost entirely go-to-market. And I'm not a sales guy, but my role has become, okay, we need to stand up a go-to-market engine that plugs the right skill sets in. How do we do that? And that becomes my job.
Okay, that's interesting. While I was preparing for this interview, I noticed that you mentioned this right now. You were once the CEO of a wellness startup, right, in
Yeah,
its
yeah,
early
yeah.
stages, and I'm just curious, like, how has that experience shaped your views on leadership and strategy in your role at Tempo?
It's a great question. I shutting that company down was hard. It's always hard, right? Even if you can see the writing on the wall, it's always tough to tell everybody, hey, I think we need to be done. I think it needs to be over. We really struggled to fundraise, and I had no experience in fundraising. It was tough. We were too early. I think we focused on the wrong things, and that's my fault as the CEO of the company. Uh, but if you'd asked me, we shut that down in late 2018. Had you asked me in 2020, 2021, uh, what did you learn from that? I'd be like, man, hell if I know. Like I learned it's hard, and I learned it doesn't work every time, and I learned, to focus more on my mental energy. Like, hey, focus more on being the best leader you can be every day instead of trying to fix every problem. Like I learned things like that. It wasn't until I saw Rye, my boss, work that some of those learnings started to snap into place. It's like, oh, I understood more than I thought I did. But in fundraising and in team leadership, I was often missing like an important piece. It's like I've gotten to watch Rye put into practice a lot of the things that I was trying to learn during that. And the reason that Rye's able to do that is Rye built a very successful, billion-dollar company with Astronomer and learned all those lessons the hard way himself, after a long career in tech already. So I think that one of the main things I have learned now, I realize from that experience, is a lot of building a startup about the story that you're telling and telling a really good one and telling a story that's plausible. And you're always building a company a little bit bigger than the one you have. Rye talked to me about this before. He was like, hey, when you talk to me about your previous startup, it sounds like you saw the wall coming, and the wall was running out of money. The wall was, I can't pay the people who need to be paid. And we're not going to get that fundraise. We're going to have to rethink it all. And you started slowing down because you saw the wall coming. And Rye said, that's not how I view this. It's like, if we're wrong, if we're so wrong about what we're building, that it's just not going to work out, the sooner we find that out, the better. That's not a license to spend money on things you don't need, but it is a license to spend money on things you do need. And you want to get more at-bats. And if you get like tiny experiments and at-bats in the context of your larger startup while you still got money in the bank, great. But ultimately, a startup should be a swing, right? A big swing at a pitch that's coming in that you hope you're going to knock out of the park. And if you see that wall coming, you shouldn't slow down. You should accelerate. You should go faster, because the faster you find out what you have or don't have, the better. And I look back and I say, we slowed down a lot. We went into Techstars because we needed the money. We didn't go into Techstars because we thought we were ready for to be accelerated. We thought we would benefit from the name recognition, which I'm sure we did, of Techstars. And we thought we needed the money. But we would have been way better off accelerating how much we were learning about the core assumptions of our product than chasing down money. It's like, it's really counterintuitive, but you have to have the money to operate. But to get the money, you have to do impressive things. The only way to do impressive things is not to pursue the money. It's like the only way to actually build something worth investing in is to stop paying attention to the investors. It's good information to get from them. Oh, we're looking to see more traction. Okay, cool. We'll incorporate. We'll think about that. We'll think about what traction would look like. But ultimately, you're trying to build an investable business, not trying to impress a particular investor. And I think I got way over focused on what individual investors thought the company should be or what we needed to demonstrate. And I mean, Rye is really putting on a masterclass, I think, I'm sure he did at Astronomer as well, but he's definitely putting one on at Tembo about what matters and what doesn't. And it's honestly just a privilege to be able to be that close and that involved in watching him work and seeing how he thinks about the various challenges we face as we build, hopefully the next billion-dollar company.
Yeah, and speaking about Tembo itself, as far as understood, Tembo aims to reduce this complexity of modern data stacks, right? So,
Yeah.
can you maybe explain how Tembo does this and what makes it unique among other platforms?
Yeah. Definitely. That was the number 2 visit from the cat. I'll get the
That's
keyboard.
fine.
Your poor editor. Yeah, Tembo. Well, let's not talk about Tembo. Let's back up to Postgres. So I had heard the word Postgres before, Tembo, but I'd never thought much about it because Postgres, I mean, a lot of the internet, a lot of the modern, applications, they involve Postgres somewhere, right? Like it's, I was just looking at some of our notes. According to Stack Exchange, they did like a 2023 developer survey. And Postgres was in this really super weird spot. I don't think you could say Postgres is the world's #1 database. Somebody else has that. But it is, according to the survey, the most admired database and the most desired database. People admire Postgres because of how long it's been around, what it can do, its stability, it's the fact that it's open source, like all these things. And they desire it because of what it can do. But most people who are using Postgres are using what we would call vanilla Postgres, right? They're just like, we use Postgres. Here it is. Postgres also has this really vibrant, kind of crazy, Wild West idea of extensions. If you're not familiar with Postgres extensions, the closest analog for a non-technical person like me is almost like the ecosystem of WordPress plugins. It's right. Okay, here's WordPress, but you can make it do anything. Here's how you do that. There's this plugins, but every one of those plugins is kind of like a razor blade. It can do a lot of. It can help you immensely. It can also cut you pretty bad. And so Postgres, if you're not careful, becomes this like ball of razors. You're like, ow, 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 ow. Like, I know this is really powerful and it could help me, but I also don't really know what it's doing and I can't figure it out. And I'm interested in this idea of extensions, but we're using RDS and RDS doesn't support those extensions. And so now I have to self-host Postgres and I don't understand it. Meanwhile, there's tons of we talk about database sprawl, the sprawl of the modern data stack. What we mean is like anytime you want to do anything new, you have to sign a new contract. There's got to be a new vendor for that, right? If it's vector, if it's document-based databases, transactional, like if you're doing anything in machine learning or LLMs, like now you need a different kind of database, tuned in a different way with different features. And before you know it, you've got 12 contracts with managed database providers. It's like, well, this is a lot. Meanwhile, Postgres technically could do all of those things if you want to spend the time to figure out exactly how to do it. And that's the gap we're trying to close. It's like, well, if everybody wishes they could use Postgres, and Postgres can do almost anything that these other managed database providers can do and can serve all these use cases and take all these production workloads, why isn't everybody using Postgres for everything? It's like, well, we think they should. They should be using Postgres for everything. No one has stepped up to say, we're Postgres for everything, right? We'll let you do all of it. And there's lots of folks doing various versions of this. They are Postgres for X, right? But it's like, I'm going to date myself here, but there used to be I think it was the ad campaign for the PlayStation 3. That's how old I am. But the PlayStation 3 is like, it only does, games. It only does movies. It only does TV. And it would scroll through like, oh, it does everything. This is the only thing you have to buy because it's going to serve all the needs that you have. And we talked about that campaign early in our like messaging work because it was like, oh, like we really do want people to believe they can use Postgres for all of their use cases. And we want it to be as simple as, oh, you need to add on, you're starting to dabble in LLMs and what they could mean for your product. Well, we can do that too. Don't worry. That's as simple as clicking a couple of buttons and setting some parameters, and now you can do that too. That's what we hope Postgres can be, and that's the work we're doing, is trying to get that wild west of extensions, and even some of the other providers are doing incredible work and building on top of Postgres and getting them all together. In fact, I'll plug my boss has a podcast called Hacking Postgres, and he just does this. But his guests are people who are doing crazy things with Postgres. And so we're trying to tell that story, is that you really can have Postgres for everything. And if you can't do it right now, you'll be able to do it soon because we're going to build it.
And speaking about the team that is behind Tembo, right? I made my research, right, and I found out that you started hiring engineers outside of the US, right?
Yes.
Cou- could you share your vision and principles behind this strategy of global hiring that you have at Tembo?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually obviously it's one of the big things we're here to talk about, right? But it's, I think, well, I hope Tembo is somewhat unique in this regard, and I hope it becomes less and less unique. You talk about, default global, like we were default global. It was day one. Really, I mean, so I joined the team, December 5th of last year is when I joined the team. And one of the first things we talked about in setting up our our payroll system, setting up the company, is like, we're going to hire globally from day one. I think we made our first global offer in February. So like 2 months, 2 months after we started. And part of the reason was, well, that's the best way to get the best talent. Part of that was, you can't have an American based, you can't have a US based conversation about Postgres. You can't do it. A lot of the folks who are the world leaders in Postgres are in other countries, especially in Europe. And they are doing incredible work. And a lot of the competitors whose people we might one day want to have work for us instead, they're globally based. And so it was both a function of our philosophy about hiring and a function of the space we're working with Postgres, is that we had to hire globally. And so that was we were having the EOR conversation in the first month of the company's existence, which I think is probably earlier, right? Most people would view that as, well, you figure your things out and then maybe someday you need an EOR. For us, it was, how do we have EOR from day one?
But still, as far as I understood, the majority of your team is based in the US, right? So with that,
Yeah, so I would say we have the founding engineers are
uh-huh.
all US based.
Okay.
Our CTO is in the US, but actually he came from India. So he was one of the early hires at Citus Data, which acquired by
Mm-hmm.
Microsoft, which brought him somewhere in that journey with Citus and Microsoft, it brought him to the States.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Um, but that was early for us. Early for us was, we're going to sponsor visas and we're going to
Uh-huh.
hire globally. We're going to do both
Okay.
things. But
Awesome.
by February, we had an engineer in Munich. We now have engineers in the US, of course, and states all across the US. But we also have engineers in Munich, Hyderabad, and Sao Paulo.
Mm-hmm.
And we've interviewed in Brazil,
Mm-hmm.
Sao Paulo and outside. We've interviewed, I've had extensive conversations with council about hiring in France, hiring in Germany. We were at one point talking to somebody in the Netherlands. Like we are omnivorous when it comes to who we are willing to hire and where they can live. We really don't have any limits for our recruiting on where we will hire. It really depends on wherever the perfect person shows up. We'd like to be able to hire them there.
Okay, but still, can you talk about challenges? So, what challenges and maybe opportunities do you see when recruiting engineers globally
Sure.
compared
Yeah.
to maybe locally in the US?
Yeah. These certainly not controversial points, but people may disagree with me. This is my opinion, and maybe I'm a bit privileged because I was working with a second time founder, and we knew where the seed money was coming from. So it wasn't we weren't cash strapped from the very beginning. I would say two things right away. One, if you're starting a company, you should be on a PEO in the US. You should not be handling your own HR. You should be on a PEO. And if you're going to hire globally, you should work with an EOR. Not That is not in dispute. And I know that because not only was that advice we got from our investors, it's advice I got from Rye, like, please, please, please do an EOR. Don't try to do it on your own. And then, like, as I began to explain the strategy, our finance team was like, please tell me you're using an EOR. Like, everyone was like, please, please, please tell me that you're doing this with help, with someone to help you with it. In fact, a good friend of mine, my former CTO, runs a 100% software engineering firm. Their major client is Intuit at this point, and he just got back from setting up their India office. But they did it that way, not the EOR way. Let's go set up the office, and it's been like a year-long project already. Like, it is they went into that eyes wide open, knowing this is a long-term strategy with significant investment. And essentially, one of the founders, their full-time job was figuring out India. Like, that is not a luxury most early stage startups are going to have. And so you should absolutely work with an EOR. Now, challenges is that you're going to bang your head against, like, if you think about, it's like thinking about the global hiring landscape as one of those, like, kids' playground jungle gyms with the bars everywhere, but you can't see any of the bars. So you're just walking through, and then you bang your shin against something and trip, and you see your head slam into another bar, and then you move and you realize you have to climb over that thing. Like, it's a nightmare in the sense that every country is different. The EORs do a lot of work to just do that for you. And our experience, we use Rippling for our EOR. We also looked at Deal. We looked at others. We were already using Rippling for payroll. So it was let's just keep using the same service. So we hired in India, and that was easy. And then we go to hire in Brazil, and we discover that Rippling isn't ready to hire in Brazil. So we have to have this messy global contractor situation because Rippling had to push their Brazil launch date back by 2 months because even Rippling was having trouble figuring out Brazil, because Brazil is apparently even my local legal team in Ohio was like, oh man, Brazil. Like, everybody knew that it was tough to work in Brazil. And Brazil said all these, there's the 13-month bonus, right? And there's the meal vouchers, like all these things you don't think about. Without the EOR, I can't imagine having, it would have taken up all my time. Then we go to hire in Europe. Even before we had people in Europe, we'd been scouting out people in Europe who wanted to hire. And something that EORs, at least ours, Rippling and Deal, don't tell you is, well, technically, it isn't required to have a local entity in many European countries, France and Germany specifically, because I've had experience with those. And also, if you do choose to use your EOR, they're calling it EOR, but that is not how France and Germany look at it. They look at it as a freelance relationship, and there's term limits. I think in France it's 36 months, in Germany it's 18 months. I'm sure as many different countries as I went to talk to in the EU, I would get more and more granularity and difference there. I think it comes down, you may have more opinions than me, but I think it comes down to, in France and Germany, the employee has a lot of power. And so in those countries, it's like the employee contacts Rippling and says, find me work in the US. But those governments, France and Germany, put limits on how long that can last. And so imagine that. It's like you're ready to make this super strategic hire in Germany, and they're like, this is fantastic, we love it. Just so you know, this has to end in 18 months. Who would do that, right? That's a horrible relationship. But the alternative is a local payroll provider. So you have a different payroll provider. A significant amount of my time, even with the help of an EOR, has gone towards figuring out how to hire the right way across the world, because even the EOR is not a solution, not a perfect solution for every country.
Can't agree more with you. In fact, most of those ERR providers, they do not have local entities by themselves.
Sure.
They just
Yeah,
work
yeah.
through partners, and those partners, they have their partners, that's
Right.
how
Yes,
usually it
yeah.
works.
Yeah.
Uh,
I think it's worth, I would say it's always worth the money. Even the EORs, that can be $600 a month per employee, right? Like, those are, it's absolutely worth it because the opportunity cost is on your own team's time. And like, hey, we got to hire globally, but our core business is not hiring. Our core business is building Postgres for everything.
right.
So you got to think about how much of your executive's time, or even your chief of staff's time, or your operations person's time, is going towards just becoming educated on how to hire in India.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the benefit of the PEO relationship for all US states, and of the EOR relationship for anything outside the US, for US based companies, is understanding that. It's fascinating, but it's a lot of time.
Yeah. And from your perspective, currently we see this trend, especially with big, large companies. They're trying to, push everyone just back to the office.
Hmm.
Um, how do you think global hiring will impact tech startups like Tembo in the
Yeah,
next
yeah.
5 years? What do you think about it?
I mean, I think I can speak from our perspective at Tembo. We don't have an office. I mean, we have a space in Cincinnati for people who are located here, but I'd say less than 25% of our current staff, our current employee headcount, is based close enough to ever even set foot in that office. We're really all over the US. And so back to office is like not a thing. Like that would like we set out saying we want to hire the best people no matter where they are, to then say the best people no matter where they are, but they have to come to Cincinnati. They come to Cincinnati twice a year, but any more than that would be burdensome on them and on the company in terms of expense. And to then say, oh, well, everybody has to be in an office. It's like, well, most of our people are the only person in the state or global city that they're working in. So there's no benefit to us, right? Like saying back to office makes no sense at all. For Tembo, I can see. Well, I'll say it this way, like without naming any specific names, like that's going to benefit us. Large cloud providers and large companies, especially like companies with very strong technical talent, even very strong sales talent, who are being told, hey, we're taking the freedom you had to work wherever you wanted from away, and you need to relocate back to the city in which we think you should live. That is on the one hand, is it terrible? Yes, I can't believe they're doing that. On the other hand, what a great boon for startups who now suddenly have somebody who might be willing to take a risk and go work for an earlier stage company that they might not have taken before, because the alternative is uprooting their family. Both for startups that are in that region where they live and for startups who aren't. Like, let's say you work for Amazon and Amazon is saying, hey, everybody's going to come back to Seattle. It's like, okay. They might be more likely to work for a startup based in Seattle that's not going to make them move to Seattle or make them visit a couple times a year instead of, going to the office every day, than they are to stay with Amazon, even if it's a huge pay cut. It's like, and we always think it's easy to think like, oh man, no one would ever leave that massive salary and those massive stock bonuses and all those sorts of things in large companies. It's like at some point, especially really highly compensated people, the money is no longer what they're optimizing for. If they were optimizing purely for money, they would stay at one of the big four tech companies forever. But they start to optimize for other things: opportunities, equity, the ability to build a team of their own. I can't tell you how many stories there are of people who are very talented who are being told, hey, I know you're really talented. You've been here since the beginning. You've really been great for the company. We're going to hire from outside a boss for you. A lot of those people don't stay because they've suddenly been told that they're as high as they can get at the company. And that's an opportunity. Like, I don't know that I have an opinion on it. Like, should those big companies be doing that or not? I think the better question is, how can your company, whoever you are, how can your company benefit from this back to office trend?
Yeah, that's true. And speaking about like this device that you can give to those tech leaders, maybe entrepreneurs who are trying to adapt to this rapid changes in technology, in the talent market, maybe what key three things you can give to them as advice?
Talking about like tech founders or early stage, like people leading companies. Is that what you're getting at?
Exactly, early
Okay.
stage startups,
Yeah,
tech
yeah.
startups.
So like folks in our situation, yeah. I mean, I would say as it pertains to talent, one, I'll see if I can get three out of this one train of thought. One is, if you assume that your dream candidate's answer is no, it's going to be no, right? Like walk into every interaction with anybody, no matter how senior they are, or no matter how much more money they make than what you could hope to pay them. just try it. You never know what somebody's going through or what season they're in or what pressures they have outside of their job that might lead them to, even for a time, take a chance. And I mean, the best people, even if they come work for you for a year and then they find something better, they go back to the big salary, they get a bigger thing. As long as you get real good work for them for a year, like that's incredibly valuable for your early stage business. And think about it this way, like it doesn't just actually, I'll say this is my second point. The second point is it's like a game. A friend of mine taught me to play chess when we were both kids, and he said, "Hey, remember, any move that's only accomplishing one thing is accomplishing no things. Every move you make should be accomplishing multiple things all the time." I think the same is true with your hiring. It's like, how can I fill the role with the right person? That's important. How can putting that person in that role make our company culture stronger? That's another thing it does. How can putting that person in that role with this team enhance my fundraising story? Is this a hire I can brag about, especially if it's an executive hire? That's the third thing making a hire can do. And how can this person enhance level up our company's knowledge of something where we're lacking, right? So they're going to do the job you hired them to do. That's one. They're going to make the culture better. That's two. They're going to enhance your fundraising story. That's four, or three rather. And the fourth thing they're going to do is they're going to impart their knowledge. You get to level up your company's knowledge of a certain technology or space or industry or whatever it is. Like now suddenly it's easier to justify that pay, whatever it is, even if you're paying them more than you're paying yourself, because you're getting so much benefit from that hire. And my third point, then, I would say my third piece of advice, and this is something I've seen Rai do, is I'll say, if left to my own devices, I get really fixated on things, right? I'm about seeing things through to the end. That's sort of that's what you want in a chief of staff, somebody who'll take it all the way to 100%. I would see, I want to hire that person, the perfect person. And I would go talk to them. And then I would spend a lot of time and focus all my energy on trying to convince them they should come join the company. And then if they didn't, I'd be super bummed out. I feel like I wasted my time and energy, right? That is not how I've seen Rai, a successful second-time founder, do this. Rai is always having conversations with lots and lots of people. And some of those people end up doing contract work, and that's great. And some of those people end up doing no work for us at all, but they make a couple of intros that end up being super valuable. Some of those people just become fans of what Tembo is doing, and so they talk about it. Well, that has value. And some of those, only a very small fraction of the people that we would consider making an offer to actually end up joining the company. And that should be okay. It's more about as a CEO, how can every person you talk to walk away as a fan of what you're doing, even if they can't give you the exact thing you need at that moment. Like then, yes, you're being crushed by meetings. You have 30 a day or whatever, but every meeting is accomplishing something, versus saying every meeting I take with a candidate who doesn't join is a failure. It's like, well, every meeting I take with a candidate who doesn't join is a candidate who might join later, a candidate who might refer a friend, or a candidate who might, at the very least, love what we're doing and tell the other devs they know that we're doing it. I think that perspective is helpful, especially as you get discouraged as you're trying to make hires, but what you're offering is pretty risky early stage, right? They're leaving stability to come to, instability. But you can instead of viewing every candidate you don't get as a failure, you can view every meeting you have as a chance to advance the story you're trying to tell.
Yeah, that's totally resonates with me. I still have a bunch of questions, so probably we should do round two.
Yeah, no, I'd love that. That'd be great.
Yeah, but for now, I guess we're good. I mean, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for this discussion. It's been a pleasure having you on this show, talking about like your current company and changes that you're doing in the tech space. Really appreciate that. Appreciate your insights on global hiring, remote work. Yeah, thank you for that. And let's do this round two.
Yes, I'd love that. Thanks so much.
See you.